Busted, a First Chapter Friday read aloud video with the word nerd and author Dan Gemeinhart. Today, as you listen, play along. Watch for the story quote that will appear on screen. Write it down, word by word, and then follow the instructions given to you by your teacher. Stay all the way to the end to see if you've written it down correctly. Before we begin, I want to give a quick shout out to Mr. Smith's Patroon 7 students at Bethlehem Middle School in Delmar, New York. I'm so glad you guys are here today and hope you love this story. Real quick before we begin, I want you to press pause and take a look at the images circled in this picture. They're clues, little hints to you about what this story might be about. We've got a hairless cat, bag full of money, bowl full of ravioli, and an old-fashioned microphone with some music notes. What might these things have to do with the story we're about to read? Make your prediction, and then we'll dive into Chapter 1 of Busted by Dan Gemeinhart.
Hi, my name's Amanda Zieba. Welcome to my channel, Learning with the Word Nerd, and another First Chapter Friday video. This week I'm going to be reading to you from Busted, the newest book by Dan Gemeinhart. And I know I tell you guys that I love books, and that's why I share them with you, but I loved this book. I read a lot of books, and I think that this is my favorite book that I've read all year, and it's November, so that's a lot to choose from, and this one definitely ranks at the top. Let me read you the inside blurb so you know what this story is about, and then we will dive into Chapter 1. Oscar Aberdeen is a bit of an oddball. He's a 12-year-old who is an ace at playing bridge, loves Frank Sinatra, and attends a whole lot of funerals. He's also the youngest resident of Sunny Days retirement community by more than half a century, and he wouldn't have it any other way. So when his grandpa suddenly served an eviction notice that threatens their place at Sunny Days, he needs to find some cash. Fast. Enter Jimmy Deluca, an elderly ex-mobster with a reputation for being bad news who makes Oscar an offer he can't refuse. He's got the drop on riches hidden away on the outside, and he'll share the loot with Oscar on one condition. Oscar busts him out of Sunny Days. In this heartfelt humdinger of an adventure from the #1 New York Times bestselling author of The Remarkable Journey of Coyote Sunrise, the ultimate odd couple, along with an uninvited stowaway, go from a high-stakes escape to a rollicking escapade as they search for the secret stash and forge an unlikely friendship along the way. Will Oscar succeed in saving the only home he's ever known, or will he have to fudge about it and return a failure? I could wax on poetically about how much I love this story, but we're going to dive right into it. First, real quick, Dan wrote me a little note when he sent me a copy of this book, and he said, "To Amanda, I hope you enjoy the first chapter and all of the rest too," from Dan, and I can tell you that I absolutely did. All right, Chapter 1, Saturday, 1:30 p.m. I'm 12 years old, and this is the 49th funeral I've been to. If you're thinking that a fellow would get used to the whole thing after that many, you'd be right on the money. Here's the deal. Funerals are pretty much like a green bean casserole. You've seen one, you've seen them all, and I've seen plenty of both. And honestly, I prefer the funerals. This one was a whole different ball of wax. A real humdinger. I mean, it was exactly the same. The coffin up front, the flowers stinking up the whole joint, the bummer music piped in through the speakers of the ceiling. But it was going to be tougher. No two ways about it. Standing there at the back of the funeral parlor viewing room, I could feel myself starting to get misty. "Get your act together, Oscar," I muttered to myself. "Don't be such a sappy Sal. People need you today." The casket was up at the front of the room like always. The top half of the lid was already propped open, which in my opinion is the only correct setup for a top-notch funeral. Some funeral directors like to keep the casket closed until everyone gets there and then open it all, ta-da, but that's always seemed too flashy to me, like it's some sort of magic show and they're about to saw the dearly departed in half or something. But this particular funeral was done right, because we were at Leonard Cavill's funeral home, and Leonard Cavill knows how to put together a proper funeral. Best funeral home in New Jersey, if you ask me. So there was a casket, and inside there was the deceased. Funny how you get a title at your own funeral. The deceased, the dearly departed. I mean, I guess you kind of are the star of the show, but for all my life, he'd just been Mr. Howell. "Call me Frank, kiddo," he'd said to me probably 3,000 times, but I always called him Mr. Howell, out of respect, you know? Mr. Cavill himself was bustling around, straightening the flowers and putting the programs on the chairs. I'd already helped out by dragging in all the extra chairs, squeezing in as many as I could. There was going to be a good turnout for this one. I walked down the center aisle up toward the dearly departed deceased Mr. Howell. And there he was. Eyes closed, of course, very creepy otherwise. Silvery hair gelled and combed, arms at his sides. I'd read somewhere that morticians have to lock down the deceased's closed jaw with wires and tacks because otherwise their mouth would flop open. I tried not to think about that. Mr. Cavill had done a good job on him. Of course he had. He always did way better than Heavenly Rest's funerary services across town. Just a month ago, I'd been over there for Mrs. Kinzer's service, and she was almost unrecognizable. They'd put so much makeup on her that she looked like a clown who choked on a balloon animal. She would have hated it. Lifelike is how people usually describe the deceased when they think the mortician has done a good job fancying the body up. Oh, they whisper, she looks so lifelike. Mr. Cavill had done a great job, but I wouldn't say Mr. Howell looked lifelike. He looked pretty darn dead. Not breathing was a dead giveaway, so to speak. But Mr. Howell looked like, well, Mr. Howell. Just, less alive. Hey there, Mr. Howell, I murmured, and then choked up. He looked incredibly still, obviously. But when he was alive, which wasn't all that long ago, Mr. Howell never sat still. He was always walking around, brisk and crispy and bustling and saying hello to folks and whistling and winking. In fact, there was a thing he used to say when folks would tell him to sit down and take a break for a while. There'll be plenty of time for resting when I'm dead. Turns out, he was right. How are you holding up, son? I jumped. Like all good funeral directors, Mr. Cavill had a creepy way of being able to move without making any sound. I think they have special shoes. Oh, I said, I'm holding up just fine, Mr. Cavill, thank you. It's okay to cry, son, he said. He spoke in that mournful funeral director murmur that sounds like not only are they sad for your loss, they're kind of sad to be talking at all. I know, I said, and I did. Most people cry at a funeral, and that is A-okay in my book, but I had people counting on me. You were close, weren't you? He was like a grandpa to you? I almost rolled my eyes. Sometimes I think funeral directors want you to cry. It really adds to the whole show, I guess. Yeah, I said, he was great. One of the best. And it was true. Frank Howell had been like a grandpa to me, but I have a lot of grandpas. Frank Howell wasn't the first grandpa I'd had to bury, and he wasn't going to be the last. In fact, Frank Howell wasn't even the first grandpa I'd buried this month. Mr. Cavill stood there a minute, breathing silently, probably waiting for me to burst into tears so he could magically produce a tissue. Another funeral director trick, before he finally gave up and glided soundlessly away. I was about to walk myself away to get ready for the crowd when I noticed something. Mr. Howell was wearing his gray suit, the one he always wore for funerals, ironically, nicely pressed with a black silk tie. He looked great, but something was missing. He always wore a pocket square when he wore that suit, a little white handkerchief folded neatly sticking up out of the breast pocket. It was a nice touch, really brought the look together. Pure class. But laying there now for all the world to see him one last time, his pocket was empty. I frowned. If I'd asked Mr. Howell if he would have ever worn that suit without a pocket square, he probably would have answered, "Over my dead body." And now that was literally the case. It wasn't right. Luckily, I'd learned how a true gentleman dressed from Mr. Howell himself, so I pulled the pocket square out of my own pocket and slipped it into his and gently patted it flat. "Looking sharp," I said, then leaned in closer. "Thanks for everything. You are always top-notch, Mr. Howell." I hesitated. I knew exactly what Mr. Howell would have said if he hadn't been so deceased, and it was my last chance. So I put on a little smile and said, "I'll miss you, Frank. Out of respect, I'll really miss you." And then I did get teary, and my throat got all tight, and I really wanted to make Mr. Cavill's day and burst into tears right there next to the dead body of one of the best people I ever knew. But behind me, through the parlor and out the double front doors, I heard the rumble of a shuttle bus pulling up, and the people on that shuttle bus were counting on me. An old friend of mine, Guadalupe Montoya, once gave me this pearl of wisdom: do the good thing. I'd been about 5 and dealing with a real doozy of a situation involving telling the truth about who'd raided the snack bin at preschool. You mean the right thing? I asked. She shrugged. Right and wrong can get confusing sometimes, she said. So just do the good thing. Then she leaned in and looked me in the eyes. I know you always will. It's something that maybe I would have forgotten, except that Guadalupe Montoya died of a stroke the next day, funeral number 8, and her words always stuck with me. Sobbing all over Frank Howell would have been a perfectly okay thing to do, but the good thing to do was pull myself together and be there for the folks that needed me. So I did. I straightened my tie, adjusted my cufflinks, rolled a kink out of my neck, took a few deep breaths, and then I turned and walked outside. The shuttle bus's folding doors squeaked open and the hydraulics hissed as it lowered down. The little ramp folded out and settled into the curb for folks with walkers or wheelchairs or bad hips. The words on the side of the shuttle bus said Sunny Days Retirement Community. After all, not Sunny Days Track and Field Team. Hey, Mr. Nielsen, I said to the mustachioed man driving the bus. I kept my voice very solemn for the occasion. Hey there, Oscar, he said back. His eyes were red and watery. This is just the first group, he said, his voice hoarse. Let's get 'em inside so I can head back for the others. I stepped aboard and looked at the rows of familiar faces, all dressed in their Sunday best even though it was a Saturday. Several were already dabbing at their eyes with handkerchiefs or tissues. I nodded to my actual Gramps, Pops, who was there in the second row with his arm around Mrs. Olmsted. Mrs. Olmsted was pretty close to outright weeping, which was no surprise. I'd seen her turn on the waterworks during a pet food commercial. My grandpa tightened his lips and nodded back at me and rubbed his own red-rimmed eyes with his free hand. Hello, everyone, I said. How does he look, dear? Mrs. Swanson asked. He looks great, Mrs. Swanson, very lifelike. There was a murmur of approval. Now let's get you all inside so we can pay our respects. And then there was a 10-minute flurry of holding elbows and pushing wheelchairs and offering tissues. I had my cheeks kissed and my hand patted, and I dodged a few attempts to tousle my hair. Pops gave me a long, tight hug. I think Mr. Howell was his best friend. 25 minutes later, Mr. Nielsen and I had gotten both busloads of guests inside and into the rows of the chairs facing the coffin, and it was time for the main event. I helped the last guest to his seat, Mr. Rodriguez, delayed by a second trip to the men's room, mumbling about his prostate, and then grabbed one of the last few empty chairs in the joint in the back row. Mr. Cavill stood gravely at the front of the room, hands clasped behind his back. From time to time, he discreetly checked his watch. The service was supposed to start at 2 o'clock, and it was 2:07. I didn't know what the holdup was. Mr. Cavill usually ran a pretty tight ship. Then the double doors behind me opened, and I turned and saw who walked in. Ah, it was Mr. Howell's son. Our paths had crossed a couple of times, but I didn't know him that well. From what I did know, though, showing up late to his dad's funeral seemed about right. They weren't exactly two peas in a pod, Mr. Howell and his son. He had his hair gelled back all slick, and he was wearing a decent suit. No pocket square, though, I noticed. There was a girl by his side about my age. I kind of remember seeing her before, too, Mr. Howell's granddaughter. She'd only come around once or twice, and not for years. Her hair was a big, frizzy mass of tight red curls. She was wearing a white dress with big, bright yellow sunflowers all over it. But she was wearing a long-sleeved black t-shirt underneath it, and her legs sticking out of the bottom were wearing ripped-up old jeans and bright pink flip-flops. It wasn't what anyone would really call a funeral look. Her dad was holding her by the elbow and guiding her toward the seat, save for them at the front, but she yanked her arm free and stopped. She walked over and flopped down in the only chair in the back row, the only one right next to yours truly. Her dad gave her an exasperated look, but just shook his head and turned and kept walking to the front. The girl sat next to me, slouched down in her chair, arms crossed against her chest, chewing loudly on a wad of gum. She turned toward me, but I kept my eyes straight ahead. Anger was emanating off her like a stink off a tuna casserole. And I like to give folks privacy when they're grieving, or something for that matter. But she had other ideas. Hey, she whispered. I reluctantly gave her a sideways look. She was looking at me with narrowed eyes. I've seen you before. You're that weird kid, right? I wasn't sure how to answer that, so I just murmured, I'm sorry for your loss, and held out my hand. My name's Oscar, and I was a friend of your grandfather's. Natasha, she said, shaking my hand with a little smile. She looked very amused, which isn't how people usually look at their grandpa's funeral. You were a friend of his? How old are you? But before I could answer, Mr. Cavill cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming, he said, and then launched into his opening remarks. So how long does this show last? Natasha asked me. She barely bothered whispering. I frowned. Luckily, it was Mr. and Mrs. Brown sitting in the seats in front of us. They wouldn't have heard us if we'd started playing trumpets and setting off fireworks. It's not a show, I answered in a distinct whisper. It's a service. We sat there. She still had her head toward me, chewing her gum. I lasted about 5 loud chews before I huffed out a breath. About half an hour, I answered. She groaned. Mr. Cavill finished his remarks and some soft music started, and we all bowed our heads and closed our eyes for a moment of prayer and reflection. Correction, most of us bowed our heads and closed our eyes for a moment of prayer and reflection. What's with this music? Natasha asked, practically into my ear, making me flinch. It's Ave Maria, I mumbled. It's terrible, she said. It makes me wish I was the one in the coffin. I frowned. It's not that bad. You like this stuff? I couldn't help but feel rude talking to her with my eyes closed. Not that she seemed to feel rude talking to me during my quiet moment of prayer and reflection. I sighed and opened one eye to look at her. It's a pretty standard funeral favorite. It's supposed to be somber and, respectful. I shot a conspicuous look at her ragged blue jeans when I said that. First of all, she said, pointing to her jeans, life is too short for uncomfortable clothes. And second, if this was my funeral, I'd have a whole different vibe, for sure. It'd all be Sleater-Kinney and the Pogues. To say yeah, Natasha died, but she's not dead. You know what I mean? I didn't, though. She sat there looking at me, though, chawing her wad of gum, waiting for an answer, I guessed. Good to have a plan, I said at last. What about you? What do you want playing at your funeral? I knew the answer without even having to think about it. Having been to 49 funerals, it's something I'd noodled on before. Frank Sinatra, I said. Frank Sinatra? The guy with the Christmas songs? I sighed. He did have some holiday records, yes, but he's more known for records? How old are you? I cleared my throat. The music of Frank Sinatra transcends age, I said. And yeah, maybe I did sound old even to me. The music of Frank Sinatra transcends age? Seriously, how old? I'm 12, I said, through gritted teeth. Oh, samesies, she said, and held her fist toward me. It took me a second to realize she wanted me to do one of those fist bump things that kids these days are always doing. People say I'm mature for my age, I said, giving her her waiting fist a side eye, hands still in my lap. And people did say that, all the time. Huh, she said, her fist still held out. Nobody ever tells me that. I opened my mouth, then closed it. I was following that whole, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all rule. Her fist still hung there. Waiting, she whispered. I kept my eyes straight ahead. Waiting. I blew a breath out through my nose. Waiting, 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 wait. I rolled my eyes and lifted my hand to give her a fist a half-hearted bump. I saw her grin out of the corner of my eye. Ave Maria wrapped up, and then Margie Beecham went up to read a Bible passage. So, Natasha whispered, and her voice sounded a little different. Still casual, but maybe like she was trying not to sound casual. When did they, wheel him out or whatever? Who? I heard her swallow. Grandpa. I was confused for a second because, well, there he was. But then I realized that she was sitting directly behind Mrs. Brown. And Mrs. Brown had a sort of locally famous big poofy hairdo. It was kind of Ronald McDonald, but white instead of red. And that gigantic bulbous hair-sprayed cotton ball was right between Natasha and the casket. He's right there, I said quietly and pointed gently around Mrs. Brown's massive hair. Natasha stiffened and then leaned a little to the side to look, and she let out a small gasp. I chanced a quick look her way and saw that her eyes were all shiny and her mouth open a little. No gum chewing whatsoever. She looked at it and kind of rolled her eyes and sniffed and shook her head, but I held it there just like she had with her fist a minute before. Oh, sorry, I missed a paragraph. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the little pack of tissues I always brought to the funeral. I pulled one loose and held it out to her. She looked at it and kind of rolled her eyes and sniffed and shook her head, but I held it there just like she had with her fist a minute before. I didn't say, waiting, though. Not my style. Finally, a couple of tears broke free from her eyes, and she grabbed the tissue and wiped her cheeks, her face turned away from me. I'm sorry, I whispered. He was a good man. And he was. She shrugged one shoulder, still dabbing with the tissue. It's just my first dead body, she said. Yours? Not even close, I answered. The service had moved on to another song, Amazing Grace, one of Mr. Howell's favorites. Some folks were singing along. What song are they singing? Mr. Brown shouted into Mrs. Brown's poof ball. What? What song are they singing? He repeated at a full holler. Mrs. Brown scowled at him. How should I know? Mr. Brown scowled back and waved her words away with an impatient hand. Natasha gave me a look. They take turns wearing the hearing aids, I said, leaning in. I guess they both thought it was the other one's turn. She scrunched up her eyebrows at me and then leaned toward me. Why are you here? She asked. I looked left, then right, then looked back to her and shrugged. The other seats were taken. No, why are you always at my grandpa's old folks' home? Every time I visit, you're there. Oh, I live there. She blinked twice. You live there? I nodded. You live at a nursing home. It's not a nursing home, it's a retirement community, and yes, I am a resident. Are you retired? No, I said, I'm in 7th grade. Then why do you live there? I sighed. It wasn't my favorite question, but it was one I got a lot when I first met people. Luckily, though, I was saved by the song ending. Mr. Cavill made eye contact with me, and I nodded and stood up. Where are you going? Natasha asked. I pulled a little stack of note cards out of the inside of my pocket. I'm going to give your grandfather's eulogy. Nice to meet you, Natasha. And that's the end of chapter 1. And if you want to find out what happens next to Oscar and Natasha and all the people at Sunny Days, and trust me, you are going to want to know what happens, pick up a copy of Busted and read it for yourself. But now we are going to go and have a chat with the author, Dan Gemeinhart. All right, readers, we are in for a real treat because we are here with the author of Busted, Dan Gemeinhart. Dan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here and talk about Busted.
Absolutely. Well, I have it right here. I loved this book so much. Yeah, look, twinsies. And the very first thing that I read on this book was the dedication, which you dedicated to your wife, and you said, thank you for cheering me on with this story. It's an idea I've had for a long time, and thanks for kind of almost like making me do it. And so I'm curious about how long, how do you decide when a story is ready to be told, or how long do you have an idea? Or maybe what's your process for deciding which ideas get to turn into stories? There's 17 questions in there, but go with whatever comes to mind.
Oh, no, it's a great question. And it's a fun, messy part of the process when you finish one story and you're going to jump into something else, and you've hopefully got a few ideas, and whatever you choose is going to be your life for the next couple of years, and so you want to pick something you're really into. So yeah, the idea for Busted came out just now, 2025, but my original brainstorming document that I made where I said, what if a kid was raised in a retirement home? That document is from 2013. And so I had the idea a long time ago, but I wasn't quite sure. I wasn't quite ready. How's it going to go? And so I kept writing my other books in the middle. And that's before my first book came out. My first book came out in 2015. So this goes way back. But I told my wife about it. And every time between every book, she would say, oh, write that retirement home one next. That sounds really fun and funny. I want to read that one. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm ready yet. It didn't feel solid enough in my head. So I said that. I kept for a decade, I said that. And then finally in 2023, she's like, do the retirement home story. That is the one I want to read. And so I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. And then so my process then is a lot of times I'll have a few ideas, and I'll write the first chapter of a few ideas and see which one I get the most excited about. And so I wrote the first chapter of Busted, and loved it and fell in love with Oscar, fell in love with the whole story. And so I didn't even bother with the other ones, and I jumped into writing it and had a blast. I've never had more fun writing a book than I had writing this one because the plot and the characters are so fun and funny, at least for me. And so yeah, this one happened because my my wife kept pestering me to finally sit down and do it.
So maybe the lesson there is to be careful about which ideas you share, or maybe to share all the ideas so you have a cheerleader for every one of them.
And the lesson's also to listen to your wife. So
Yeah. Oh, a great lesson. Great lesson to listen to your significant other. One of the things that you mentioned is the characters in the story, and much like I did with Coyote Sunrise, I loved the cast of characters. They have such unique voices and distinct personalities. So I'm wondering if you could share with us a little tip that you have for creating characters, or maybe for how you keep them so unique, or how you create them to be so unique.
yeah, I could talk about characters all day. Characters for me are the most fun part, as a writer and as a reader, and the most important part. I spend most of my time and heartache and concentration and hair pulling out when I'm writing, not thinking about the plot, but thinking about the characters. Who are they? What would they do? How would they react to this? How would they feel? Because that's really what the story is. The plot's almost unimportant. It doesn't really matter if the character goes left instead of right. They probably would both work. What matters is how they think about it, how they feel about it, what they overcome, why they're doing the things they're doing. That's what the story is really about. So basically, I mean, I spend a lot of time on my characters, thinking about them and rewriting and rewriting and rewriting scenes, to get to know them and to get them right. And I'll often like in this book, I wrote the first 6 chapters and rewrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it numerous times before I moved on to the rest of the book because I really wanted to know Oscar, know who he was, know what he would do so the rest of this story would ring true. And so that if I get it right, it's just through work
Mm-hmm.
and repetition. And what you then try to do is you try not to have your readers have to take your word for it. If I say a character is nice, you may or may not believe me. So what you're looking for is chances for the character to show they're nice, show them doing
Mm-hmm.
nice or mean things or whatever. So through their dialogue and through their actions, that's how a reader's going to get to know the character. So again, when I'm going through those first few chapters over and over again, I'm making sure that Oscar and Natasha and Jimmy are showing who they are so that the reader feels like they know them. So then the reader wants to cheer for them and wants to follow along for the whole story.
Yeah, absolutely. I was in for the whole ride, the wild, crazy ride. On a tactical or like very tangible level, do you have a document where you write down facts about these people, or a notebook, or like a Pinterest board, or any way, or do you just hold all that in your head?
I mostly hold it in my head. Early on, I actually went into that little app Bitmoji where you can make like little cartoon characters.
Oh
And
yeah.
I made cartoon characters for each character just so I could kind of picture them a little better. And that also helps you get to know them, like what kind of clothes would they choose to wear, what kind of
Hmm.
expression you put on their face. That's more getting to know you. As far as logistics, I did have a just like a note on my computer, like not a physical note, but the app note. And because I was to keep track of what kind of car was it. I kept forgetting what kind of, because it's a very specific car,
Yes.
and the names of the supporting staff and things at Sunny Days and what we've learned about each character, and kind of when, so I refer back to it,
Hmm.
because I'm not great at keeping those details in mind, and it's always annoying when you're in the flow and so, shoot, what did I say? His last name was
Yeah.
this or that. And you have to go back and try to find it. So I did have a note, not very long, but to keep track of those
Yeah.
stuff, just to save myself time and heartache, basically.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, one of the kind of unseen things about the story sometimes, in many novels, not just this one, is like the structure, the thing that's holding it all together. And I love the way that you structured this novel with telling us not only the chapter number, but what day it was, what time it was, and how many hours they had until they were busted if they didn't get back to Sunny Days at a certain time. And some readers might not think that that's like a big deal, but I it was so important and it was so effective. And so I'm curious when that piece of the story puzzle kind of came in place. Did you always like have this countdown ticker coming into your head, or was that like in a later revision?
That was definitely a later revision. In fact, I don't remember. I might have to give someone else credit. I know
Yeah.
that came about in our So I do a bunch of drafts on my own, but then once it goes to your publisher, you'll go through 4 or 5 more rounds of editing and revising with your editor. And somewhere in there, and I don't remember if it was my idea, I hope it was, or my editor's idea, Brian, probably his, super smart guy, but somewhere along the line, either he or I said, oh, wouldn't this be fun to kind of keep that through line through the story and to remind readers of the stakes, of the urgency, like there's a ticking clock. And hopefully you're having fun with each little scene, but also to keep the bigger picture in mind. Like
Hmm.
time is running out for these characters. It's getting more urgent and more desperate. And that kind of ramps up the excitement and the interest. So one of us, maybe me, maybe him, had that idea. So that was not in my rough draft or my first few drafts on my own. That came about through the editing. And I think I agree. Whether it was my idea or not, I think it was a great addition. It doesn't add much, or it doesn't take much away. It doesn't take a lot of time, but it just kind of, turns everything up a little bit in the story.
Yeah, it raises the stakes, definitely. And I think you bring up two good points there. One, that like writing a book is like a group project, right? Like you're starting it and you're having the cheerleader of your wife and you're having the help of your editor and like listening to those ideas of other people can be really helpful. The other thing is just like, hey readers, when you're reading a book, like pay attention to like why is this working? Why do I like this? Because then you can use those things in your own writing.
100%. And I
Um,
talk about them. Sorry, I talk about it all the time when I talk to young writers or even adult writers. I'll do adult workshops. And one of the things I say to prepare, if you want to be a storyteller or a writer someday, is yes, read a lot and love it and fall into the story, but also what you're just talking about, read like a writer. Like, oh, why did the author do this? Oh, now I'm crying. How did the author make me feel these big things? Look at what other authors have done, and you can learn how to maybe incorporate that into your own stuff. Yeah, it's a great way to read.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned crying. I emailed Dan, side conversation for all of you, that I was finishing this book on a plane and I was just ugly crying in my seat at midnight finishing up this book. So you definitely nailed that part. My next question for you is, the main character Oscar is a rule follower. He is a stickler when it comes to it. He often gets kind of chided or teased that he's a goody two shoes. Natasha, on the other hand, is a you only live once, like break the rules if they're meant to be broken, kind of lives life by the seat of her pants kind of kid. And I'm curious, which were you when you were a kid? Were you more an Oscar or were you more a Natasha?
I was definitely more an Oscar for sure. Maybe not quite to his extreme. Like he's a through and through goody two shoes, and he wants to be a goody two shoes.
Mhm.
I was just kind of afraid of getting in trouble. I guess I wanted to be good, but it was also more the deterrent. But he doesn't care. Well, he does care about getting in trouble, but he sincerely like wants to be a really good kid because he's been raised in this old folks home, and he's got like 100 grandparents, and they all love him and adore him and think he's perfect, and so he wants to live up to that. So I was a less sincere goody two shoes than Oscar.
Awesome. I always think it's fun to learn about, the creators of stories and what they were like at the age that their readers are currently. Okay, my last question for you is, it is often a dream for writers to have their books turned into movies, and I think that this would make an awesome movie. And if you were the producer or you got to be the casting agent, who would you cast to play Oscar and Natasha and Jimmy?
Nice. Well, it is a fun what if kind of thing. It would be a blast. And so for the kid actors, I don't know a lot of kid actors just off the top of my head. But I can tell you who I was kind of thinking of as I was writing it. I was trying to get Oscar's character in, and he is a total goody two shoes, like he's a total sweetheart, but he's also kind of sarcastic, which is
Hmm.
tricky to be both sarcastic and sweet. And so the voice that I had in my head was the adult actor Ryan Reynolds, because Ryan Reynolds, he's got that quick little kind of snarky, but you also kind of like him as even in his
Yes.
snarky characters, like he's got that softness
Yes.
in his eyes. He's always kind of a good guy who's just kind of sarcastic, and so I was kind of picturing that. That doesn't get us to an actor, but that's what I was picturing.
Yes.
And then
Yes.
same for Natasha, which in fact is how she got her characteristics. Is there's an actress, I'm not sure she's done a lot for kids. I think it might be mostly grown-up stuff. But her name's Natasha Lyonne, and she's a great actress, and she has bright red hair like Natasha, and her name is Natasha. I gave her that name because
Yes.
I pictured her, Natasha Lyonne's voice and her personality, at least that I've seen in movies. I don't know her, but
Yes.
what she portrays in her TV shows and films. And so I was picturing a 12-year-old Ryan Reynolds and a 12-year-old Natasha Lyonne, which was very amusing in my head and fun to
Yes.
write. And then for Jimmy, it could go two different directions. It definitely could be like, if this is dream casting, like a Robert De Niro, right? He would be pretty
Mm-hmm.
amazing in that role. But also, someone else mentioned to me Danny DeVito, and I had
That's what
not
I was
pictured.
thinking.
Oh, nice. And I had not gone in that direction. And as soon as someone said Danny DeVito, I was like, oh my gosh, Danny DeVito would be amazing in this role. Like, amazing. I wish I could say I thought of him while I wrote it, but once I heard it, I was like, oh man.
Yeah.
So in my mind, it would be like either De Niro or DeVito. Oh, it's a D either way.
Yes.
Which makes sense. His last name's DeLuca. Look at that. It's like meant to be. De Niro, DeLuca,
Yes.
DeVito. So that's kind of who I picture in my dream casting.
Okay, well, if I get any say or votes to the universe, I would love to see Busted as a movie. Like Disney could pull it off. They do so well with it. So we'll just manifest that. We'll just make that
Put it out there.
happen.
Put it out there.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dan, so much for this story, for all of your other great stories, for sharing your time and stories with us. Real quick, if a reader had another question for you, where would be the best place to contact them? And do you want to tell us about anything else that's coming up next? I know this book is so new, so you're probably still in this, but anything else you want to share with us?
Oh, sure. To get in touch with me, my website's just my name, dangemeinhart.com. And on that website, there is a like send Dan a message, and you can send me an email. If any young readers do that, you have to type in your own email address. Be sure to do that exactly right. If you have even one letter or number wrong, I'll get
Yeah.
this really sweet email and I'll reply to it, and it'll bounce back and say this is not a real email address. So the kid put in one little thing wrong. I don't know what letter it is or what number it is. And so they think I just never wrote back. So be sure to be very careful when you're putting your email address in. And as far as next up, I don't have any middle grade novels on like the calendar. I'm working on some various things, but I do have another picture book coming out next year, The Gingerbread Yeti, which is connected to my last picture book, The Gingerbread Monster. And I also have a graphic novel adaptation of my book, The Remarkable Journey of Coyote Sunrise. So that's going to be a graphic novel, but it's going to come out in 2028. So don't hold your
Yeah.
breath because I've finished my part basically, but some poor person has to do 300 pages of art. And
Yeah.
so Coyote Sunrise graphic novel in 2028. And just probably this week, I'm going to jump into the next novel, just like I did with Busted. And hopefully I'll write it and it'll be worthwhile and someone will publish it.
Yes. That is amazing. I'm so excited about Coyote Sunrise. Yes, graphic novels take forever. But we will be very excited about all of that. Again, thank you so much for your time, and readers, we will see you again next week for another First Chapter Friday. Happy reading.
Thanks, guys.
This week's mystery quote says, right and wrong can get confusing sometimes, so just do the good thing. To continue reading Busted by Dan Gemeinhart, pick up a copy from your school library, purchase one from your favorite local indie bookstore, or grab it via the Amazon link I've got down for you in the video description box. Then be sure to take a look at the playlist for the rest of the First Chapter Friday videos. I've got more than 200 of them ready and waiting for you. Truly, we have something for everyone. Graphic novels, novels in verse, prose novels, historical fiction, science fiction, realistic fiction, literally anything and everything you might want to read is there waiting for you to check out. Thanks so much for visiting my channel, Learning with the Word Nerd. I hope you come back again for more First Chapter Fridays, brain breaks, direct instruction videos, and more. I'll see you again next time. Happy reading.